Welcome to today's episode of the AlphaMind Podcast. Today is just me, your normal host Steven Goldstein. Unfortunately, my colleague Mark Randall wasn't able to join us today. He will be back hopefully for our next episode. And we also are doing this for the second time without a guest. We do have a series of episodes with outstanding guests, many of whom you will have heard of coming up over the next few months. But we just wanted to go in the direction of sharing some thoughts with you, our audience, some of our own thoughts. Now, in today's episodes, I will be chewing the fat and sharing some thoughts on what is one of the most disruptive and disabling forces for people in the world of trading, the topic of shame. Before we head there, just a few words about our podcast partner, the Society of Technical Analysts, who provide outstanding educational services and support services for people across the world of trading. Amongst their many outstanding services, the STA offer their brilliant home study course in technical analysis. This course is offered to listeners of the AlphaMind Podcast at a discount. You can find out more about this discount by going to our website, alpha-mind.net. The home study course has been put together by many of the world's leading technical analysts exclusively for the Society of Technical Analysts and takes you into a far deeper understanding of what technical analysis is and how to apply it effectively. Now, on with this week's podcast. So it is just me, myself, on my own, talking about this topic, which is a fascinating topic that I don't think gets talked about enough. And it's one that I hear so often in the coaching programs that I run with traders. It's a topic which I recognise in myself from my own trading years. And it's something which is, I suppose you can say, it's with me, it's with us all the time. Now, shame, what is shame? Shame it's one of the most powerful and yet often unspoken about or unrecognised emotions that deeply impact us, and in fact impacts any individual when they're striving to achieve high performance in their work as traders or investors, and across various fields including sports, business and trading. And I would say that it arises from a sense of inadequacy, failure, that what we might perceive as personal flaws, not being good enough. And that can prompt feelings of humiliation, unworthiness, and lies at the root of what some people, and Brené Brown writes about this often, a scarcity mindset. So in high performance environments, and trading is exactly one of those, whether you work at home on your own, trading your own money, or whether you work in a large organisation such as a sell-side firm, maybe an investment bank or an energy trading firm, or a buy-side firm. And in all those environments, shame can be particularly damaging because it undermines our confidence, it disables our creativity, and it rips apart our ability to be resilient. So when we experience shame, and I'm going to keep using we because I'm a human and this happens to all humans, and doesn't matter who they are. I work with many clients, many coaching clients, many traders and managers at all levels. I hear their stories of their experiences with this, and this shame, it within them, it becomes them being overly self-critical, beating themselves up, turning in on themselves. And when that happens, they avoid taking risks. They become prone to fear of failure and other fear-based behaviours. They fall off their process and they lose sight of their purpose. And this hampers their growth, and it hampers their ability to achieve what they're quite capable of achieving. Okay, and there's lots of side issues to this. I mean, we get caught up in perfectionism. Okay, and I've been there as a trader. I've experienced that. and over finessing a trade, trying to get the perfect entry, trying to aim for the perfect exit point, trying to buy the low, sell the high, or even buy the high. That was very much part of my method. If you're a momentum trader, you're often going to be buying new highs or selling new lows. So, this is a very challenging emotion that we feel, and it can lead to burnout. It can cause you, if not permanent burnout, periodic burnout, exhaustion, periods where you just lose complete synchronization with the market, and completely abandon your process and become the victim rather than the victor. And this is further complicated because we have a reluctance to seek help. Because at this point in time, this is often when we need help. When we need help the most, whether it's just revealing to a colleague that you're going through a difficult period, although to be honest, they can usually see it. Revealing the truth of your anguish and pain to your partner, your wife, your husband, that you're suffering from, because they probably don't want to ask you too much when they see you coming in from this. And we don't want to burden them with it sometimes. Or we just want to hold it within ourselves, which, come on, it's the worst thing of all. It could be the same when going to a manager, a mentor, a coach, the reluctance to do that. So you can imagine that the actual situation, and by the way, I'm just going to put this out there, everyone does this. Everyone is prone to this. Okay, and everyone periodically will suffer from this. Some in different ways to others. Some will hold it within them. Some will be more vocal about it. But that reluctance to then get help or to recognise it and do something about it then just seeds further underperformance. It becomes the start of the vicious cycle. And there's, this comes from within us, but it also comes from outside. Pressure to perform, social pressures to excel, pressures to meet expectations. And these can often intensify feelings of shame, which just creates this vicious cycle where the fear of judgment actually stifles progress. We have so many examples of it. Okay, and it goes deep within us. It goes very deep within us. We first experience shame as a child, at school, or maybe even before that. We wouldn't have experienced it as much, but it is part of our natural human emotions. And it serves a purpose because we are social beings. All our emotions serve some sort of purpose, usually linked to survival. And if we do something which feels shameful, we're more likely to try and conform to the group we're in, which helps social cohesion of that group. But nonetheless, these social pressures to excel, to conform, to meet expectations, which intensify these deep feelings of shame, just create this vicious circle where our own fear of judgment, fear of being judged, fear of judging ourselves harshly, and most of it is self-judgment, stifles our progress. So what can you do about it? How do you deal with it? I'm sure most of you recognise it. That feeling when you put on a trade and it goes wrong. And you then dig your heels in now because you don't want to admit you're wrong. You don't want to cut the losing trade out because it is that admittance that it's wrong. Okay? Or you start then trying to find justifications to be within it. To hold the trade. And many market makers will recognise the moment they quote a client without really having a view, and the client hits them, and the market immediately moves against them, and now they're sitting with some risk on their books that they didn't really want, and they're faced with a choice of either just cutting it out and taking the loss, or sitting with it, hoping it'll come back. And sometimes it does, and that's okay, and sometimes they'll take a small profit on it, but every now and then it won't come back, and it will just go further against them, and they could be sitting there on a large loss at the end of the day. And it doesn't have to be a market maker. I'm sure we can all experience this. Or you took a trade for the wrong reason. You took a trade because somebody else was taking the trade, or somebody recommended it, or you read it somewhere, or you just had a hunch and it wasn't really a proper process trade. And now you're sitting with this risk on your books, on your hands, that if you're honest, you didn't really want. But rather than do that, you find an excuse for it. You do some research, you start digging, and you give yourself a reason to stay with it. You manufacture a reason. And they're the worst ones. Okay? You're now just conforming to your own bias. You don't want to admit you were wrong. You don't want to admit you were stupid. Okay? You don't want to admit you were an idiot. You definitely don't want to take the loss. So you sit there and you construct a reason to be in this trade. Okay? Now, I'm talking to you, but this was very much, 25 years trading. Many times I've done that and come to regret it. And that then becomes part of this vicious cycle. And then, you start to really feel the shame as it goes wrong. So unless you do something about this, unless you start addressing this, you're just going to become one of those individuals who operates well short of their full potential. Because this is going to lead to losses. This is going to lead, it does lead and it will lead to missed opportunities. This will lead to you failing to capture some of the opportunity set available to you. Okay? This is where you fall short of all your expectations for yourself. And like I say, you're human. Do not think you're exceptional. Everyone does it. And this can be helpful to know and helpful to realise. I coach some of the world's top hedge fund traders, literally titans of the market. And I coach many brilliant retail traders, many brilliant private traders, many excellent sell-side traders. And all of them will screw up at times, and all of them will get into the shame cycle and hit the shame barrier at some point. If you don't believe me, go and check out the Stanley Druckenmiller podcast from last year, Inside the Mind of a Legendary Investor. It was the In Good Company podcast with Nikolai Tangen, who was the CEO, or is a CEO, of the Norges Bank Investment Management Group. And it was a brilliant episode. It was one of those where I think every single trader should listen to it. And I've listened to it a couple of times. And there is a bit late on in the episode where Stanley Druckenmiller talks about what happened to him. I think it was the 2001 stock market crash, where in his description, he literally paid the high of the market. Why did he pay the high of the market? He did what every single one of us would do. We'd missed out. He'd missed out. Okay, he didn't believe in the big bull run up in tech stocks, so he wasn't part of the later stages of that move. And that move just carried on and on and on very aggressively. And a lot of the younger traders, the more inexperienced traders around him, were in on that move. And they were making a lot of money. And I guess he got some sort of FOMO happening as he watched it, thinking, well, I should be the one making all this money, and I'm probably a little bit of a clown compared to these far less experienced guys, and I've got this great reputation. As we say, Stanley is human, and he, in his words, pretty much bought the top of the market, and then it crashed. And that was a very, very difficult episode for him, and eventually closed out his positions, and he walked away from the market at that point, and he didn't know if he was coming back. He had to deal with that himself. Okay, something was, obviously there was a lot of turmoil within his mind, and he had to deal with it personally. And I think he actually took a sabbatical, unsure of whether he was coming back or not. As it was, he did come back after a few months, but in that time he had to get complete separation from the market, do a complete reset, clear his head, get headspace, and perhaps asking himself, how did he get it so wrong? And he got it wrong because he did what we all do. You know, we have feelings of inadequacy. I'm reading between the lines here. He didn't tell me this. I'd love to interview him, but it was probably that feeling of shame that he should be making as much money as these young and experienced guys, and that took him off process. That took him away from his purpose. That got him involved in the market where he was physically there but psychologically absent, and then the shame that started with that then became the shame of actually making one of the worst decisions of his life, traded decisions, and then losing a lot of money. So it kind of all compounded upon it. So yeah, it can happen to every single one of us. It has happened to every single one of us, and it happens to the best of us. And Stanley Druckenmiller really is the best of us. So, check yourself at this point. It's perfectly normal. Okay? Traders struggle with feelings of inadequacy. Traders struggle with fear of failure. And this silently sabotages their performance. Often this takes them into, and if you've read my book, Mastering the Mental Game of Trading, you'll be familiar with the performance process cycle model, and the death spiral is how I call it in the book, where you go on to a suboptimal performance cycle instead of staying to this optimal performance cycle, which captures the different stages of the trading process, both the analytical stage, the bit before that, about getting yourself into the right state and synchronizing with the market. Then you go into the analytical stage, or the signal reading stage, and you formulate ideas, whether they're short-term signals or longer-term narratives, and then you build into a trade construction. Is this a trade that I like? And you ask yourself whether you want to do it or not, and then you act. You engage with risk. There is a little bit of hesitation sometimes, the what-if zone, and this can be problematic. But then you move through the trade and you get to the outcome, either an outcome that you want or an outcome that you didn't want. And ideally what you do to complete the cycle is you let go, you get closure on what happened, you move on from it, you accept what happened. Okay, you don't beat yourself up, you might critique yourself, and you try and learn from that cycle, what happened as you went round. Okay, and you get back and you reset and then you go again. Okay, now that is the healthy cycle. Okay, the suboptimal cycle though is one where you get caught between the act and the outcome, and then you just go back to the act after the outcome, then you get an outcome, back to the act. You don't complete the full cycles, but you start doing this suboptimal cycle that I call it now the what if and the should have cycle as well. What if this happens, and then should have done something different, or should have not done something, and then you're no longer thinking, you are in this tilt state, you're owned by the market, and this now starts to sabotage your performance. Okay, you are fully on tilt. And there's hard tilt, which is quite an easy one to deal with. You literally throw your toys out the pram and smash the table, or and then you get up and you walk away and you come back the next day. I can't do this anymore. That's an easy one to deal with. Hard tilt. Soft tilt, however, is far more pernicious, far more dangerous. It happens out of sight, out of mind, below the radar, below the level of consciousness. And that is often a situation where the catalyst is shame. Starting off with a bad outcome. And a bad outcome doesn't always mean losing money. It can mean not making money, not really capturing an opportunity. And you become a little bit angry, or perhaps very angry with yourself and frustrated with yourself. And you start accusing yourself, perhaps beating yourself up verbally within your head, within the mindset within there. And you don't really move on from that, and you go again and you try again, and you haven't got closure on that. You're angry with yourself, and now you start doing your behaviour slightly different, and you have another suboptimal outcome, and you start going through the same process again, and this goes on repeat, and slowly you might get into revenge trading, but you start to lose your confidence. You might start taking hope trades. You might just start fighting it, which really is revenge trading. And now you're in that shame cycle, that vicious cycle, where you can't get past this, and you become more and more angry. And at this point, you no longer see the market clearly, because the idea with letting go is to get back, as I always tell people with that cycle, the reset is the bottom part of the cycle. It's the most important part of the cycle. Okay, to reset, to make time to think, to get back to balance, to resynchronize with the market and go again. And you haven't gone through that reset. It's like you've just gone straight back into it. And this is what shame does. It throws you out, and it hurts. It's painful, because shame brings up all these past feelings of inadequacy. The body holds the memory of these past traumas. So it's within your body. I can feel it even talking about it, where it is in my body. And if you think about your own shame, you will possibly put your hands to your chest or something and feel there's a slight pain because the memory comes up. And this is what's happening when you're trading. And your body keeps the score. And your body takes over. And that is a brilliant book, by the way. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. If anyone's interested in reading about trauma and how to cope with it, or how to understand it better. But this just sends you back and back and back. And we start losing money. We go off process. We become suboptimal. We fail. And then it gets worse, because you're just fueling the next cycle of this. So I'm bringing shame out here into the open. Okay, I like you to think about it and how shame manifests for you in your trading, and recognize perhaps its impact on your mindset, and perhaps start developing practical strategies to recognize it and overcome it. If you don't understand it and you don't address it, you're never going to be able to unlock your true potential and really elevate and fully capture what you can do in your trading. So let's think about this shame barrier and how you have to move past that to unleash your very best performance. We'll return to the podcast in a second. What are you doing to improve yourself as a trader? At AlphaMind, we work with traders from across the markets, both professional and retail, and trading businesses, to help people improve their performance. A focus on developing performance is one of the few areas that is very, I suppose you could say, under-practiced in an industry that is really a performance industry, and where developing key aspects, key behaviours, key mindsets can have a huge impact on how you work, how you perform, how you manage risk, how you increase size, how you maintain your sense of self in the face of uncertainty. do feel free to check out our services as performance coaches. Go to our website alpha-mind.net to know more, or email us info@alpha-mind.net. Now back to the podcast. So, having introduced this topic into this reflective podcast today, I suppose it would be unfair if I didn't try to help people understand how they can better cope and manage through the shame barrier and try and overcome it. But I'm going to start with something. You will always have this because you are human. This is in your wiring. Okay? It will rise up. But what we're trying to do, what I try and get traders to think about doing, is can they turn the volume down on it? Okay? Try and think of a volume knob on a radio. Some of you younger people may not have too much idea what that is. But try and think of one. I'm sure you have a sense of what it is. And imagine it's got a marker of 1 to 10, level 10 being very loud, level 1 obviously being the quietest. We want to try and turn, however loud it is for you, we want to move that anti-clockwise a little bit so it becomes a little bit lower. Okay, and at times yours will be higher. Okay, and if you can make it a lot lower so that it's no more than a 1 or 2, that's going to be brilliant. Okay, this is what the best performers do. This is what the best athletes do. This is what the best business people do. This is what the best traders do. They don't not have it, they're just better able to cope with it and deal with it than anyone else, and it becomes less debilitating. So, again, I'm just going to mention my book. I don't mind giving my book a plug. It was published last year for anyone listening. It was called Mastering the Mental Game of Trading. And it's really about, in a way, I suppose you could say it's the book that I never had, that I always would have liked when I started trading some 40 years ago. Sort of kind of an instruction manual for individuals on the mental, the psychological challenges of trading. I suppose that's the best way I would call it. And I introduced models and frameworks. And the key framework in there is the performance process cycle. This 4-phase cycle that we go through when we're engaged in trading. It's probably a little bit like the OODA cycle, if you're familiar with that, which is a decision-making cycle, but it goes beyond that. It falls back into also how we are. It brings much more our personal state into it than, say, the OODA cycle. So before the decision-making process, part of the cycle, the transactional part, we get into the right personal state, ready to trade, and then after the trade is completed or the decision has been made, we then have to deal with the aftermath of that. And that is what I call the final phase, the letting go phase. And if you complete the letting go phase, you've reset and you can go again in a much healthier state. And it's really in this letting go phase where shame, this after the trade, the post-trade or the post-decision, where this shame really rises up and it really starts to take hold of our trading. So it's here we're going to be dealing with the aftermath. This is where the feelings are going to be most generated or truly generated, although they will start to be generated even before the trade happens. As we go to the action phase, our body will be starting to think about how can we avoid shame? How can we not have it? That's why we get pulled into FOMO behaviours, because we'll feel ashamed if we're not invited to the trading party. Okay? And it takes over our process then. So shame has already started much earlier in the process, but it's really in the aftermath of a trade or an outcome that you need to really deal with it. Okay? So what can you do with this? This is going to sound obvious. It's going to sound like I'm talking like some sort of monk, but acceptance, acknowledgement and acceptance. We have to recognize and accept that feelings of shame, okay, are part of this process, are part of being human, okay? And, some people I know, they bring this in much earlier into their trading process. They start preparing for that much earlier. That's why they have a robust process, because they know this is going to happen afterwards and they don't want it to be so strong. Okay, so understand that this is natural. Okay, everyone else has it as well. It's part of your wiring. Okay, and if you can accept that, you can maybe start to turn the volume down on some of the judgment, because there's a lot of self-judgment starts to happen in this final part of the process cycle. If you can, try and think what the root cause was of that. Okay, reflect on what may have triggered your shame. Was it a specific outcome? Was it a belief, a fear, a behavior? The more you can understand about its origins, the more effective it is. And there's going to be one individual who I think will be listening to this podcast, who will recognise this story, because I think it was part of his. Although I've heard this many times from other people, but this is perhaps a particular client where this was more explicit, where he called me up, and this guy was a brilliant trader, an extraordinary trader, still is, and said that he'd become paralysed by fear in his trading. It'd never been a major part of his process. There's always a little bit there, it has to be. Fear is there to protect us as well. But his trading, his decision making had become almost paralysed, and it was fear. And we went step back through the trade to try and understand where this came from and where this started. And when we did this, he realised where his errors had been, and he hadn't realised what they were. Okay, they were much earlier in the decision-making cycle than he realised. Okay, and he did something out of character. Okay, and it was a kind of FOMO aspect, and that started a bit of a vicious cycle, a vicious spiral. It took him into that, and then he became stuck. So once we managed to sort of pull that and pick that apart, he felt liberated, and he literally got straight back into his trading, realised that, he had done something in his process, he'd fallen out of it a little bit, but he now was unstuck, and he was started trading again and making a lot of money, and still does make a lot of money. Now, the next tip, this is going to sound really weird, but for anyone who read my book, okay, the very first story in the book is one where I tell an example of how a colleague showed me compassion. Okay, we're not very good with being compassionate to ourselves, but sometimes it's really helpful when somebody else just says something nice about you, or says something, which checks you, or effectively they put a big man hug around your shoulders. Come on, guy, you could do this. You're much better than this. And I've had 3 or 4 times in my 25-year trading career when I was really in a bit of a spiral. I was really lost, and someone showed me some compassion. Someone gave me a leg up, put their arm around me, or just gave me some really good advice that took me out of that and took me straight back to focusing on my process, and I started making money again. Now, that was them showing compassion to you, and it's incredibly powerful when someone can do that. Now, imagine the power of being able to do that to yourself. Imagine if I didn't have to wait for somebody else to do it to me, but I could actually be the person showing myself compassion. That is why it's so powerful. Self-compassion is the antidote to beating yourself up, to berating yourself, to turning in on yourself, to being overly harsh on yourself, to being too self-judgmental, okay, to somehow feeling that you need to be perfect. If you can show yourself some compassion, give yourself a break, pull yourself back, be realistic. We're always going to be overly harsh on ourselves. That's human nature again. Okay, but it's not helpful. The self-judgment isn't helpful. Usually it's unrealistic anyway. So a little bit of self-compassion, or even a lot of self-compassion, can be really helpful. And if you can start practicing that, replace self-criticism, okay, with more of a nurturing inner dialogue, what I call self-critique. That way you can learn from your past, situations, your past errors, your past good outcomes, and bring them in. They become learning opportunities. If you get too involved in self-judgment and self-criticism, you close your eyes to them, you close your ears to them, you cut off your senses to them, which means you're only going to repeat them again. You're not going to grow. So there's a lot of power in developing the ability to be self-compassionate. Challenge negative thoughts. Try and question and reframe these overly harsh beliefs that are associated with shame. Okay? I am not good enough is something we often feel. It's a scarcity mindset. Okay? Most of us would have gone through this at many times in our lives, often in our early years, often in school. We might put our hand up and shout out an answer in school, and we didn't understand the question and everyone laughs at us, and that's when we often experience early shame. We may do something stupid in a sport at school, and we'll feel shame from that. We feel we're not good enough. We call ourselves an idiot. You can think of that little image of the little boy going home and telling their parents, I'm an idiot, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Okay, and that's not true. And if it was your child, okay, you'd show them some compassion, wouldn't you? You'd tell them, of course you are. And you remind them that, what, we all make mistakes. Okay, and you are capable of doing better, you're capable of growing. This is why I always say trading is a performance activity. And if you look at great sports people, they fail regularly. They fail over and over again. And that's what makes them successful. One of my all-time favourite quotes is this from Michael Jordan. You may have heard this. But if you haven't, just listen. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Just think about that for a second. You might want to Google that and print that quote off and put it somewhere on your screen, because having reminders of this is very powerful when you're engaging in these challenges, when you're trying to challenge your negative thoughts. As I've said, share your feelings with other people. We're not good at that, especially men. We resist doing it. We feel foolish, perhaps. But it can be really helpful to open up to supportive friends, to mentors. If you've got a therapist, speak with your therapist. If you have a coach or are thinking of working with a coach, you really need to open up and share these feelings with them, because they're not judging you, but they want to understand you, and they want to know what are some of the drivers that inhibit how you perform. So do feel free to share with others. I do suggest it. Focus on progress, not perfection. Okay? Progress, not perfection. Perfection is an impossible standard. So you need to shift your mindset from not achieving perfection, from fearing failure, to viewing mistakes as opportunities for learning and improvement. You might have noticed that thread coming through quite a few of these points. Okay? And you might want to write that down on a note. Progress, not perfection. And all this leads to developing greater resilience. Okay? So you might want to develop practices which help foster greater resilience, external practices. Think of mindfulness, think of meditation. I encourage people to journal. If anyone has my book or read my book, you would have seen what I said about the 3-3-1 journal, a very simple journaling process in the book. And journaling is one of the most powerful simple things you can do to support your trading and to help you become a better trader and a better person whilst trading. Okay, it helps you get what you want out. Okay, so you really want to do things that foster emotional resilience. You want to develop a better relationship with yourself. You want to develop a better relationship with the market, or if you work in an organisation, with the people around you in the organisation itself. Okay, and ultimately you want to build a better relationship with the nature of markets. Okay, the uncertainty of markets. Okay, and the fact that you cannot know. Knowing is impossible. Okay, and you're doing something that is complex, and with the benefit of hindsight, so many things will look like mistakes, but in reality they're just dealing with uncertain situations. So really try to develop this resilience mindset. A great book that is really worth exploring if you haven't read it is Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. She talks about these two mindsets. One's called a fixed mindset, which really does set you into this negative spiral, okay, and where you get hooked on perfectionism and beating yourself up. And the growth mindset, one where you change and you accept mistakes as part of the process, and you develop that inner resilience that you need. So all of this in my performance process cycle is a big part of this letting go phase. Okay, there's more to it than that, but these are steps, these are things you can do during the letting go phase of the cycle, and it's what helps you get back to the reset. The reset is key. The reset is this really fertile place that gets you to move on from whatever happened, and you move on to the next trade. You start engaging with the market, you start synchronizing with the market in an effective way. You start reading it, you start seeing it, you start sensing it, and that allows you to move on and start putting your process into practice in a way which aligns with the purpose of what you're doing in your work. And that's really it. That's me sharing some thoughts on shame. I hope you found it useful. I hope it's triggered some reflections for you. I know how tough this job is. It really is. It's hard enough battling with the markets. It's a lot harder if you have to battle with yourself as well. So if you can win, or at least improve that battle, that constant ongoing battle with yourself, learn more about yourself, understand yourself, then the transactional battle with the markets will get a lot easier. You'll find it a lot easier to execute well within there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time today. Do check out our podcast sponsor, the Brilliant Society of Technical Analysts. They're an amazing organisation. They've been around for over 50 years. They're not for profit, so they're not there to make money out of you. Membership of it, gives you a chance to attend meetings online, listen to speakers, attend their events, and of course do their educational programs, which includes their fantastic home study course, of which if you are a regular listener to this podcast, you will be able to be aware that you can get a small discount if you go to our website, alpha-mind.net, and you'll see details of how to get that on there. I do highly recommend this course. It's put together by some of the world's most senior technical analysts, and it's a big part of improving how you engage and how you analyse markets and understand them. And with that, I just want to say I wish you the very best of luck in the markets as you go forward. Do join me, do join my colleague Mark Randall, who hopefully will be back for our next episode, and wishing you well.